Welcome. Welcome to the second part of this three-part series, this lecture series on the music of the High Holiday Prayers. Today I'm here with Dr. Amalia Kedem of the National Library of Israel. Welcome, Amalia.
Hello, thank you.
And today we are going to be talking about the melodies used in the prayers of the High Holidays and the challenges that they pose both to the cantor and to the congregants. So maybe we should start by talking about what we just heard now. What did we just hear?
This is a tune for piyut, for a liturgical poem, inserted into the Tefillah of Yom Kippurim. It describes the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, when he is done with the ritual of atoning for the entire people of Israel. And in terms of the structure of the prayer, this is a culmination moment of great excitement. And the tune we heard now, which was composed particularly for this text, was composed in 1971, or maybe before that, but it was published in a record by the group called Pirchei London, or the London School of Jewish Music. Its first record in 1971 had this song, and ever since it has become the tune for the piyut called Mar'eh Kohen. I think until this very day it has not been replaced with such a successful tune, which is a very interesting point when we're talking about a prayer that is centuries old.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I think not many people who sing this as an oral tradition, as something that they've heard someone sing in synagogue without all this accompaniment, they hear it, and I don't think not many people know that it's actually a pop song. It's a song which isn't so old. It was meant to be recorded and published in a recording. And how did this pop song even come to be used and sung in the synagogue?
Yes. So we'll talk about that, and we'll see there are different sources of tunes that are incorporated into the prayer. Maybe we should say a few words about why at all bring in tunes like those into the prayer. As we all know, the prayers are very old. We're talking about an accumulation of texts that are centuries old. And during the High Holidays, we have an element in the prayer, in the general Jewish prayer, that is more prevalent and more dominant than in the rest of the year. And that is the poetical part, what we call the piyutim. That these are sacred songs that were written in order to ornament the prayer and make it more festive, or a little bit like the aria in the opera, to enhance a moment and allow an expression of some
religious emotion, to beautify the moment of the prayer, to be uplifting maybe.
To express a religious emotion of that moment, and there were different moments during the very long High Holidays prayers. Many parts of the prayer have their own tunes and have had tunes, set tunes for many years. We differ between what we call the obligatory prayer, which are the set parts of the text that are said throughout the entire year. For example, the Amidah prayer, Kriyat Shema, some psalms that are sung or said, and many of the brachot. During the High Holidays, we have, on top of the special obligatory texts that are specific to Yamim Noraim, we have the other element, which are those piyutim, those poems that were created by chazanim and paitanim since the destruction of the temple. We know it goes that far back, and they have been composed, written as poems, and composed to different tunes, and it is impossible to go track back exactly what were the oldest tunes. But we have some reminiscence, and we have some tunes in the Ashkenazi congregations. We find some tunes that are probably from the Middle Ages, which means maybe 400 or 500 years old. One of them, for example, is Eder Vahod, which is a tune that was used by Ashkenazi Jews from Germany and that area, what we called Western Ashkenaz. I'll just give an example what it sounds like. Eder vahod deten betzivyon, sheva eror beni vehigayon. And then the congregation gives a response, Ekra Elohim Elyon, either with a tune or without. And then the second part of the tune, ביום הנבחר משמי ארץ, מי שרים לשפוט קדושתו לארץ. And then the congregation says, אדוני מלך תגל הארץ. And the third part, גאוותו גדלה עולמי מאכיל, עזוזו לספר כוח מי יכיל. And that three-part tune repeats itself along the verses. This is only one verse. And it has become like a symbolic name for old tunes of piyutim. Like Eder Vahod is an old tune. Some people, maybe some of you hear a tune that is familiar from the piyut Anim Zemirot, which is based on this tune. Anim Zemirot v'shirim ero ki elecha nafshi tarok. But then that's only two parts because it's a different structure of a piyut. So some of the tunes remained. Some are still used, but today we're a good way into the 21st century. We find a very big variety of tunes. Some are very old and some are, as you said, very new, from the 70s or even later.
So maybe we should ask, what is the function of these melodies? What do these melodies help happen in the prayer, help to do? What is their actual creative force? The main challenge of prayers in the synagogue during the high holidays is the length of the prayer. There is an abundant amount of text to be said. Now, as we know, in all the traditions, texts in the synagogue are never said, they're never spoken. If they're spoken, it's probably the sermon by the rabbi or people whispering during prayer. Don't do that. But everything that is said and read from the prayer book is sung or chanted, so in some kind of tune. When there is a large amount of text to be sung or said, and with many of those piyutim, those poetic texts that were written in order to enhance the prayer, as we said, there is the custom of opening the ark where the Torah scrolls are in the front of the synagogue. And the Ashkenazi minhag is whenever the ark is open, people stand up. I call it the Ashkenazi reflex. It opens, everybody gets up. And the matter of fact is that Ashkenazi synagogues, people stand for a long time during the prayers of the high holidays. And many of those moments are in order to sing some of those piyutim. So now the cantor or whoever leads the prayer should find a tune that will fit the text, whether it has a refrain or any response. Like we said, we saw here with Mar'eh Kohen, you can see it. The format of the piyut is standard. There's a standard formula. כאוהל הנמצח בדרי מעלה, כברקים היוצאים מזיו החיות, כגודל גדילים בארבע קצוות, etc., etc. These are all images or imageries of the high priest. How wonderful. מה נהדר היה כהן גדול when he came out of the Holy of Holies from the temple. And the response is Mar'eh Kohen. And this is not something that the congregation needs even a textbook for, because they just hear Mar'eh Kohen and they repeat Mar'eh Kohen. And also it's possible to see that there is an alphabetic acrostic here. Ke'ohel, kivrakim, ke'godel, and it goes on and on. I didn't put here the entire text. So what we heard in the very particular tune that was written in 1971 for this piyut, that it was written already with the response.
Da la 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 la. Mare Cohen. It's different. It's two different parts. Then it's very clear that there are two bodies that will perform each one of them. Kind of question. Mare Cohen, etc.
So the community knows what their role is. And it's easy to remember because they just have to say the same words every time in two different melodic formulas. They just...
Exactly. It's very simple. And the opening text of the piyut, Emet Ma Nehedar, becomes a refrain. So every 4 verses or less or more, they come with Emet Ma Nehedar, etc.
So if you want to continue and ask ourselves, in what way did the different communities design their prayer using the melodies, design the musical repertoire of their prayers? We see that there are different kinds of usages, even when you have one piyut, meaning it's something which is in a poetic form, there are different ways of expressing this musically.
Absolutely.
And music gives kind of a commentary, or it gives it a feeling.
Yes, there are different criteria for choosing melodies for singing. And we're talking now about mainly what is called congregational singing. And it could be, usually it would be the mandate of the prayer leader, the cantor. He will be the one choosing the tune, hopefully preparing in advance how it fits the words. And he will start, and this is the moment when people prepare to lead the tefillah in high holidays. They need to go through the entire book and see what are the parts where they would need some rest because they have been saying and chanting a lot of text, and just give the key, a sign to the congregation, and they will carry on. So the tune has to be really fitting, and depending on where in the prayer we are, if you want to get excitement or an uplifting feeling or any other emotion. So let's see some of the strategies of choosing tunes. For example, one of the very important piyutim here in both in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippurim, V'chol Ma'aminim. It comes in the prayer in Musaf immediately after Kedusha. So again, we have an alphabetic acrostic here, which is doubled. Ha'ochez biyad midat mishpat, v'chol ma'aminim shehu el emunah, Aleph and Aleph. Then Bet, ha'bochen uvodek ginzei nistarot, v'chol ma'aminim shehu bochen kelayot. And then Gimel, hagoel mimavet ufodeh mishachat, v'chol ma'aminim shehu goel chazak. Now the format here is a little bit confusing, so many of the tunes start with the words v'chol ma'aminim, which makes a shift, and instead of starting with ha'ochez, they start with v'chol ma'aminim, and then
so it makes the order different. V'chol ma'aminim is the A part of the melody. And
so the full sentence would be v'chol ma'aminim shehu el emunah habochen uvodeh ginzei nistarot.
Yeah.
Which is a question, and has challenged and interesting that many people are not aware of it, and maybe that's one of the reasons that it's not talked, and it's not anything that prevents the prayer from being performed or being said, because usually the music is much stronger than the text itself and how exactly it works out its way through the text. Many people come to the synagogue. It's very hard for 4 or 5 hours to concentrate on every word, and many times the music chosen is what carries them, and that's what creates the feeling. And so even if it doesn't stay loyal to the actual original structure of the piyut, the way it was envisioned when the actual poet wrote it, it doesn't matter, because as you say, the music is what leads people, and maybe it doesn't even occur to them that it's written in a different form. Exactly. V'chol ma'aminim, as you see, it has the words v'chol ma'aminim, so anything that has to do with emunah can be used maybe. Let's hear two examples of tunes that were composed for this text. One of them is by Mordechai ben David from the end of the 70s, from a record called V'chol Maminim, which has many other tunes that are popular until this very day for the High Holiday prayers. So let's hear number 2, please.
וכל מאמינים, וכל מאמינים, מאמינים של חי וקיים. וכל מאמינים, וכל מאמינים, מאמינים של חי וקיים. הטוב ומיטיב ומיטיב לרועים ולטובים. הטוב ומיטיב ומיטיב לרועים ולטובים. הטוב
Yeah. Obviously, Mordechai ben David doesn't sing the entire piyut because it's very long, but you get a model of the way that you can actually sing the entire thing. Usually the custom is to sing some of the verses and then have the cantor say them, chant them in a way, in a nusach. This tune actually took over a much older one that was famous for decades, known by the famous cantor Yosele Rosenblatt. Let's hear some of his tune from a record from 1921.
Interesting. It feels a little bit more free as far as the tempo. He could play with it a little bit, and I think we always think of these kind of melodies as something which it's so important the congregation can join in and sing together, but sometimes these melodies maybe were also just sung by a cantor in a way which didn't always allow or invite the congregational participation.
Yes, we're talking about the changing of times. It's a zeitgeist. Yosele Rosenblatt died in 1933, and the time that he was in his peak, what we call the golden age of cantorial music, the records from 1910, 20s and 30s, that's when cantorial music, coming from the end of the 19th century and all over Europe, became an art in and of itself. And in many ways, because of the circumstances that Jews lived in Europe, music in the synagogue was a very important part of their culture. And then there was time, and there was reverence, and there was people had the patience to hear a cantor singing with or without a choir. That's for a different conversation, how that developed. But Yosele Rosenblatt is really an emblem of cantorial music from Eastern Europe, very artistic, very modern. He uses all kinds of vocal techniques, like falsetto, and very musical, and of course in a cantorial style. And this is definitely not something that people can join in. They're not supposed to, because the cantor is there to sing and let them hear and identify and direct their feelings a little bit through his singing.
So it's interesting. It seems to me as though the congregation, over time has sort of changed the role. When there's a melody, once upon a time, perhaps the cantor brought in a melody to change, to shift, to have a different change of atmosphere, but it wasn't necessarily to allow the people to join in. And I think that this, as you say, people who came to listen to Yosele Rosenblatt, they had a different kind of mode of active listening, where even just by listening to a melody, they were participating. Whereas today, I think, there very much is a desire of the community as a whole to all be performers, to all sing together. And melodies have to tap into this desire and to suit for congregational singing.
Absolutely. And it's very interesting, we were talking about cantorial music that eventually, as we could hear now, was recorded on records. And as we know today, the classical cantorial music has basically left the shul, it left the synagogue, and it has become a genre of concert music. There are concerts of chazanut, and people go back to listen to them. They still listen to chazanut, or they go to these concerts, and it's rather rare to have a real cantorial piece sung in the synagogues today, even when there is a cantor. And usually they would either shorten it or just give some, a little piece here or there. And that media of the record has influenced the tefillah, even though there was like a two-way movement. So we're talking about the synagogue developing through the 19th century, 20th century, and then some of these cantorial pieces recorded on records and slowly leaving the synagogue. Mm-hmm. And towards the 40s, 50s, and much more towards the 70s, when we have new genres of music being composed, what we call the neo-Hasidic music or popular religious songs.
So it starts off as pop.
They start as pop and then
they
made their way because
the
of that cultural shift that you just mentioned. The people, I call it there is, during the 20th century, we see a very clear process of democratization of the synagogue. People don't want somebody to be in charge,
the authority,
the authority and will decide, and they want to participate. The model of the 19th century synagogue, with everybody being quiet and there is a choir or just a cantor. We know, there were many changes, through after the First World War and much more even after, between the wars, with the beginnings of Bnei Akiva and Zionism. Mm-hmm. The idea of creating a new Jewish collective has brought together, the kibbutzim and all these initiatives that put together people either from the same origin or not. And that gave a very strong push to incorporating many Hasidic nigunim. Maybe we'll hear now 2 examples and soon some more. And then the neo-Hasidic tunes that little by little came in, and we started with Amalia Kedem, which is one of those tunes that was recorded on a record. It was popular. It was either played on the radio, we don't know, or people bought the record and listened to it, and just it's not like they take this tune and put it for other texts, because Amalia Kedem is part of the liturgy. It's right there.
Exactly. Yes. And maybe there wasn't even a popular melody before.
There was no. Yes. So some tunes are just lucky.
Yeah.
And some fit into some lacuna that was there. And so let's hear another tune for V'chol Ma'aminim. And here we have a tune that was not written for this text. It was written for one of the statements, the religious statements that we have in the prayer book, Ani Ma'amin Be'emunah Shelema Be'biat HaMashiach. And that's a song also performed by a group of children, a group called Pirchei Agudat Israel, and that's a record that came out in 1968. The composer is a person named Yossi Parnas. And let's hear a little bit of that song. That's number 4, please. Okay, so it's enough to have one person who is in charge of leading the prayers in one synagogue to listen to this record and say, well, that's a great tune. And just fitted on בכל מאמינים. וכל מאמינים שהוא אל אמונה, הבוחן ובודה גזדי נסתרות, וכל מאמינים. Now there's no response, so the congregation joins in. שהוא בוחן כליות, הגואל ממוות ופודה משחת. Now the second part. וכל המאמינים שהוא גואל חזק אדן יחידי לב העולם. Now, once you know the tune, you heard it for one verse, two verses, that's it. The congregation can continue. There is an element of, the responsibility of, as I said before, of the cantor to plan in advance to see that it actually matches, and also, let the people sing, let my people sing, but direct them, make sure that they
can
that the matching and that the matching is not messed up.
But of course, there's this extra musical notion of emunah, ma'aminim,
exactly.
faith.
Taking ani ma'amin to put for v'chol ma'aminim, very interesting. Let's hear one more example of taking the opportunity to express a ideological Zionistic feeling. A very beautiful example sung by Rav Moshe Tzvi Neria, who is considered to be the father of Yeshivot Bnei Akiva and Yeshivot HaEsder, who composed and also incorporated all kinds of songs into the tefillah, and in a way, I think it's not exaggerated to say that he is responsible for designing some parts of what we call today the religious Zionistic prayer in those circles. So we'll hear a little bit of the nigun that he puts for Bechol Ma'aminim, and then when he gets to, you see in the last line on the screen, you see Hamamlich Melachim Velo HaMelucha, where we're talking, of course, about God, who is the one who crowns all the kings. But he creates here an association between Hamalchut of Hashem, the kingship of Hashem in the world, by putting here the tune of Hatikva, which symbolizes the kingdom of Israel, the new kingdom of Israel in modern times. Let's hear number 5, please.
הממליך מלכים, אוי מלכים, הממליך מלכים.
Thank you. Okay, so that's V'chol Ma'aminim, but we have other texts that are even more challenging. For example, look at this. Adirei Ayuma Yadiru B'kol. This is a piyut for Shacharit of Rosh Hashanah. Right away, you can see the verses are much longer. And there is a triple, we're not going to go to all the details, but there's a triple response here. There is a pasuk, Adonai Melech, Adonai Malach, Adonai Imloch L'olam Va'ed, which is a kind of refrain. And then each verse is divided into 3, and after each one of those 3 parts, the congregation says Hashem Melech, and then they say Hashem Malach, and then they say Hashem Imloch. So it's an intricate structure, but if you choose a good tune, you can run with that. I'll just give you an example for a tune that I documented some years ago in a synagogue in Jerusalem. אדירי איומה ידירו בקול אדוני מלך ברואי ברק יברכו בקול אדוני מלך גיבורי גובה יגבירו בקול אדוני ימלוך. And then the refrain, Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. And there's a second part. Doharei dolkim, ידובבו וקול אדוני מלך, etc., etc. Here the challenge is, of course, it's a great tune.
Right.
And you know,
it invites everyone to join
and
in.
it has like this inertia. It's very, very strong.
Yeah.
But here the challenge of the prayer leader, whoever chooses this, is to plan well how to put the words into the tune. It was not meant to be sung
on this text.
text.
But that's a challenge. Often we find that certain words are scrambled together, other words are dragged out. For melodies which, unlike Amalia Kedem, which is written to fit the actual text, often we have these what's called sticking a melody to a text. And then you have things which have to be figured out. Have to be sometimes squished or sometimes opened up.
Yeah, what you were describing now is our reality. The reality in the synagogues, but it doesn't have to be like that, and there's not an ideal of, squishing. And that happens when the music takes over the text.
Yeah, it takes priority.
It's not, it's not too far-fetched to say that sometimes the music is really more important. Because many of those piyutim, they're very hard language, very hard Hebrew, and even for Hebrew speakers, it's hard and it's clear. If you just look at this, Adirei ayuma ya'adiru, beru'ei varak yevarechu, Bet, Gimel, Gimborei gova yagbiru. Of course, there's a play here. This is like a game with words, of course, meant to glorify Hashem, but it's not meant for, deep philosophical or emotional feelings. So we just want to have
riddle,
this
in a way, like kind of a puzzle.
It's a kind of a word game,
word, yeah.
but something that will keep us, uplifted. So really, it's a challenge, and choosing a good tune here is very important.
We spoke in our previous session about nusach and about the Sinai melodies. And I imagine there's a certain tension as to how much nusach is said. As we say, the community is waiting and anticipating a melody. So especially in the last few years, perhaps the last half a century. And how much percentage of the prayer will be nusach, what percentage of the prayer will be Sinai melodies, which we've learned are ancient melodies, which are set to a certain text and will not be replaced. We will not find a new melody for Kol Nidrei anytime soon. Versus how much of these new melodies will come in, when will older melodies be replaced by new melodies which sometimes need to be sung. Both of them need to be sung because they're so important. So we have like a musical exchange, sometimes of generations, sometimes of different styles of music. So the prayer, you go there, it's the same words, but you maybe don't always know what the tune is going to be. Is it going to be the tune I know, or is the cantor going to try and introduce a new melody to try and maybe refresh or revive?
Yeah. You're touching upon a very delicate point, which I think is something that prayer leaders and communities in general should consider. Again, the synagogue is a democratic institute. I mean, whoever wants can come in, everybody can and should participate and be part. And yet there is the sense of the idea of tradition that cannot be kept unless there's some elements that are stable. So of course we have the book. The book is the core of the tradition of prayer, and it has been finalized in a way. Some people, skip some of the piyutim, or many of the piyutim, or all the piyutim, and still there are parts that will not be skipped and that's what also unites the different communities. We all basically hold the same text, and again, for Tfilat HaKeva, for the obligatory prayers, we share them among all the traditions, and the different communities have different piyutim, different songs inserted throughout the prayer. But it's worthwhile thinking about the fact that these texts are sung, or even just appear in our books and in front of our eyes and in our ears, once or twice, or at most 3 times. V'chol Ma'aminim is sung 3 times a year. On the morning of Rosh Hashanah, on the morning of second day of Rosh Hashanah, and the morning of Yom Kippurim, in Tfilat Musaf. probably noon already. But these are the only 3 times that we actually pronounce this piyut. So if every time this piyut will have a different tune, what is the effect on the congregation, on the children growing up in that congregation, on the connection, the association they have between this text and a certain tune?
Mm-hmm.
And it is very common today to find all kinds of tunes. For example, I found it interesting that around the circles, the musical or cultural circles that serve prayer leaders to draw music from,
Mm-hmm.
they usually don't go very far away. They don't go to the pop music, definitely not the non-Hebrew music. That happens too. We know Leonard Cohen is already
Yes.
being
Found
sung
place, yes.
with Hallelujah and others.
Who by fire.
Yes, but there was a trend of taking, either Hasidic nigunim, which of course are from the same, cultural surrounding, and many Zmirot Shabbat. One of them is called Tzama Nafshi. It's a very common tune in Ashkenazi circles. אליך ברני ועמך יעני כי לא יראני עדה וחי צמה צמה נפשי לאלוהים לאל חי ליבי ובשר ירננו לאל חי. So you can sing this very slowly and calmly, and you can sing it quickly. And for a text like either Adirei Hayuma or Melech Elyon has other tunes, but Imru Elohim and Maaseh Eloheinu, which are, I just give here, one page or a very small section from a very long piyut. This can be very useful. אל מלך בעולמו, מחיש פדות עמו, לקיים דבר עמו, כי סליחה עמו, הודו לאדוני, כי יראו בשמו, אמרו לאלוהים. So in a way it fits, and there's some kind of response here, but usually the congregation just join in.
Yeah.
It's interesting that this tune is used also for another piyut. Look at that. This is piyut V'yetayu chol ovdecha. The way it's set in many of the prayer books, it doesn't even look like a piyut. You see, before that we have a prose section. Uvchen tzadikim yiru v'yismachu v'yisharim ya'alozu. Of course, it's all poetic language, but it's not a piyut. And then afterwards, at the bottom, we have v'timloch ata Adonai levadecha al kol masecha, etc., etc. Again, prose. In the middle, we have a text that looks just like a paragraph, but it's actually a piyut. And you see again with the yellow, you see marked the alphabetic
acrostic
of
the third letter.
Always the third letter.
Yes.
Ve'ye'etayu, v'yivarechu, ve'yagidu, ve'yidrashu, v'yihalelu, etc., etc. And also we have, you see right away, we have here 22 sections or verses or half of verses that have the same formula. Okay, so there's the long word usually ve'ye'etayu with the acrostic, and then a short word usually chol le'ovdecha v'yivarechu shem kevodecha. So there is a potential here for some musicality or some okay. Now, the tune of Tzama Nafshi that I just sang works out very well. So if you're the prayer leader and you haven't prepared anything, that might be your resort now. ויתיו כל עבדיך ויברכו שם כבודיך ויגידו באים צדקך וידרשו עמים לא ידעוך. Some planning is desired. But it could work.
It can, yeah.
Maybe with this, we'll just mention. It's a very beautiful piyut and has a lot of potential in terms of composition. And for many years, mainly in Western Ashkenazi communities, the tune that was known was the one composed by Louis Lewandowski, the great composer of choral and cantorial music from Berlin, who I think is the most influential composer of the 19th century of the choral synagogue until this very day. The amount of music that he wrote that we still use this till this very day, maybe just to mention a few, Uvnucho Yomar, Hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva chadesh yameinu v'gedem. That's Lewandowski. Tzadik ata ha'marifrach. That's Lewandowski. And we'll mention soon another piece by him. He had a tune for Veyetayu, which is usually sung, very slowly and solemnly. Veyetayu chol le'ovdecha v'yivarechu shel kevodecha v'yagidu vayim tzidkecha v'yivanu. I don't remember now. That's a sign that I did not grow up with this tune, because maybe you would know it.
Possibly. Yeah, I grew up with it.
If you grew up with that, then Veyetayu, again, said 3 times a year, has a tune.
Yeah.
Okay, just like if you think of Kol Nidrei, it has a tune. It's not a Messinite tune. It was composed in the 19th century. We know exactly when, by whom, and when it was published first, probably 1860 or something like that. And yet, it fits so well, and it was performed so much that it has become identified. And it's one of the most easiest thing to do, is create a new tradition in the synagogue. Just sing it twice, 3 times, that's it. You have a tradition.
Yes. You need some cooperation by a congregation.
Absolutely.
You need, a stubborn cantor, but also a congregation which is willing to listen and to join to. Also, it's a bit of a challenge to pick up the challenge of bringing in a new melody and doing it again and again until you feel comfortable with it. But this is how traditions are made.
Yes. I believe, for both of us, growing up in a synagogue where we did not have any influence on what's going on, listening as women from the women's section, and just absorbing for many years, I think we can feel the changes of being part or being less of a part or more of a part, and we had actually a good position in just listening from the side, inspecting, listening, and thinking about what's going on in the synagogue. And when something works or doesn't work, you feel it when you are absolutely congregation and not the leader.
Yeah.
Then maybe we can teach the cantors some things.
You wanted to talk about Chamol.
Yes, so as I said, this text here, Veyetayu, doesn't look like a piyut, but it is.
Yes.
It definitely is. And I want to move on to another piyut, which is also a piyut for sure, but looks even less so. And here we're again a couple of verses before Veyetayu, and that's really at the end of Kedusha of Musaf, again 3 times a year, 2 days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippurim. חמול על מעשיך ותשמח במעשיך ויאמרו לך חוסיך בצדקך עמוסיך תוקדש אדון על כל מעשיך. You can hear the rhyme at the end of the words. כי מקדישך בקדושתך קידשת נאה לקדוש פאר מקדושים.
We have lots of kedoshim and kadosh.
Absolutely.
And
There's a piyut that is attached basically to the end of the Kedusha. We're still in the area of the Kedusha.
So you're saying there are piyutim, there are poetic, these sacred poems which actually look like a poem. They have a structure which very much shouts out this is a poem. On the other hand, this and also what we just heard before, Veyetayu, so Chamon Veyetayu are examples of these are poems, but they don't look as they're written in poetic
It depends on the book,
prose.
But in the case of Chamol, it is very rare to see prayer books that have Chamol set up.
Choose to print it.
Printed in a way that it will
be clear that it's a poem. And that
it will be
rhymes.
inviting. Yes, and also it doesn't have any kind of mishkal here. It doesn't have any
rhythm.
What?
You mean a rhythm, a poetic rhythm?
It doesn't have a poetic rhythm. It's not. There's no balance or parallelism or any other poetic tools that are used in other poems. And the question is, of course, how to say that, how to perform that. I'm sure for many of our listeners, just the word chamol, even just the word chamol, right away brings in a certain tune. Again, this tune, I'm sorry to disappoint whoever it disappoints, is not from the temple. It's not from the days, or from Sinai, nor from Sinai. Again, it was composed in the 70s, but before we hear that tune, let's hear what it could sound like before the 70s. Before, there was a very popular tune that was recorded on a record and played and has really taken over. So let's hear number 6. We're going to hear a Baal Tfilah named Yosef Bash, originally from Zagreb. And here he recorded himself in the late 60s, beginning of the 70s, for his son, who was going to be a prayer leader, a chazan, in various communities in Switzerland, where they did not have a chazan, and he just went there for Yamim Noraim to serve as a chazan. And his father recorded for him different parts of the tefillah, so he can practice and
so what we're hearing is in nusach style, meaning it's.
So this is the way he said when he was a cantor, when he was leading the tefillah, and when you reach that part, we'll hear what he does with chamor, with the text here.
תוקדשון על כל מעשיכו כי מקדישכו בקדושתו קידשתו נו אל הקדוש פאר מקדושים וכן יסקדש שמחו על השם אלוקינו על ישראל עמכו ועל ירושלים עירכו.
It's possible to discern a certain difference.
Yes. It's not entirely nusach. There's something that
there is a movement here, and of course, the way he says it takes into consideration the format of the text, the form of the text, and also the rhyme.
Yeah.
But this is in no way congregational singing tune, and is something, and it is free in terms of the tempo. So there is some, it relates to it as a different text, but again, it's a solo performance and it's just part of the chant. So what happened in 1973, the famous group Pirchei London, the London School of Jewish Music, already famous for Mare Cohen, published in 1971, comes out with a record called Negina, with the hit of all times, Chamol. Let's hear a little bit of that. Number 7, please. I'm sure everybody continues singing now. I would do the same. There's a lot to say about this recording. I'll just mention one anecdote that I encountered in a synagogue where I gave a talk about this tune, and one of the prayer leaders who was sitting in the audience for that lecture stood up and said, "Everybody please notice, the first part should be sung twice." Although in the book it appears only once. Before you go to Tugdash Adon al Kol Masecha, go back to Chamol. So that's very interesting because it's not only taking the tune and implementing it in the prayer, but also taking the format of the original,
Formats.
which is not meant to be sung as part of the prayer. It's on a record. It's meant to be played in your
Yes.
home record player,
When did this
which
become
we all
an
have.
authority, like this recording?
So that's very
teaching us?
interesting. That it's again, it means that there is a very strong sense of this music is a standalone thing, and it's so powerful that let's do it the way
They intended
it
to.
was.
It
you
has
know,
its own like authenticity.
Yes.
Yeah. Very nice.
I just want to go back to one point that you mentioned before, and that's the idea of replacing nusach and even replacing what we call the Misinai tunes, or some tunes that are that go really far back. And one of those texts is Ochila, Ochila Lael, which is it's a kind of introduction piyut, or it's actually a series of verses that is said by the chazan, and the congregation only hums a kind of response. Let me give an example. Ochila lael achalef anav, eshala mimenu maneh lashon. אשר בקלם השיר עוזו, אביע רננות בעד מפעליו. לאדם אחי לב, ומאדוני מענה לשון. אדוני שפתי תפתח, ופי יגיד תהילתך. יהיו לרצון אמרי פי, בגאון ליבי לפניך, אדוני צורי וגואלי. Something like that. There are different versions because we're not talking about a tune here, we're talking about nusach, which is, as our teacher, Professor Eliyahu Schleifer, taught us, nusach is variations on a theme that does not exist.
Yes, he told us this also.
Yes. So
so that each one does it in a different variety.
It will
but
be a
this
little-
nusach, it's almost nusach
Yes.
which is sort of crystallized. It's not just free. You can't do exactly what you
right,
want.
and the text is finalized. I mean, there's not too much you can do here, and the point and the moment in the prayer here is also quite festive, and people are standing up, and there is no tendency to take over and participate.
Yes.
Until a man by the name
Hillel Pali.
Hillel Palei came with a new tune, which is very interesting, has penetrated many, many synagogues. And in some places, I've interviewed some prayer leaders who said, I'm willing to put in this tune, incorporate it, but I will repeat the text after I have said it in the nusach.
Yes.
Or any kind of combination of the
Yes.
two, because maybe there is a feeling that we can't just let go of that. There's just something, very venerable here,
Yes.
very old, and we can't just dismiss it. I think that one of the reasons the tune, in many ways, if you do some musicological analysis here, you'll see that it really relates to the nusach. It takes the spirit and also some of the melodic movements there
yes.
are very similar, and in that sense, I would say the composer was very sensitive, and maybe was
To blend
it was,
in to the
and when somebody after the 90s, in the 21st century, when you compose verses or parts from the prayer, there's a good chance, if it's a good tune and it's singable, it will penetrate. It will be
prayer,
adopted.
yes.
So, and taking a text like Ochila Lael and putting a new tune, it's a brave thing. It's a brave step.
It is quite a challenge too with the existing tune, which has received
Yes.
some kind of canonic.
So it's interesting. We see that there is a negotiation around incorporating yes
Yeah.
or no. It's worth mentioning that Untane Tokef, written by Yair Rosenblum from Beit Hashita, with a famous refrain, ובשופר גדול ייתקע, וכל מעמד דקה יישמע, and later, בראש השנה ייכתבון. This melody was adopted into synagogues, cross-denominationally, even with, ultra-Orthodox circles. And my theory is that its success is due to the fact that there was no set tune for Untanet Tokef before that. And also, again, Yair Rosenblum as a composer was very sensitive to the prayer mode, to the musical mode of the prayer at that part of the prayer, and the feeling
of the atmosphere. Yes.
So
it was accepted.
There are some conditions here that need to be to be filled in order for a tune to be successful.
Before we conclude, shall we talk a little bit about Zacharti Lach?
Yes, there's another symbol of Yamim Noraim, a musical symbol, which is not Misinai. Again, we're talking about music from the 19th century, again by Louis Lewandowski. I would like to play for you a short part from an interview I conducted with a prayer leader from Alon Shvut named Rami Yanai. And in an interview, when we recorded the entire Nusach, his version of the tefillah that he does in the yeshiva for many years, he says this part called Zichronot, part of Musaf of Rosh Hashanah. And when he gets to that part, again, this Malchuyot, Zichronot, V'Shofarot are the main texts of Musaf of Rosh Hashanah. And again, we're talking about a lot of text. And here there's a lot of planning demanded and a lot of structuring how to say the text without getting too tired and how to engage people and keep them on their toes so they will join in every other paragraph. Just take even one sentence. Now this section, these Malchuyot, Zichronot, V'Shofarot have a lot of quotes from Torah Nevi'im and Ktuvim and or Torah and Nevi'im. And we see here a quote from Yirmiyahu. Let's hear first how he says this entire text as Nusach, as he would say it when nothing else is required. This again is said twice a year in 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. And notice that after he performs it in the Nusach way, he will say, and then there's an option of singing, and then he will just give us a little hint. He won't sing the entire tune because it's so well known. Everybody knows that if you don't say it, you would sing that tune. So let's hear that, and then we can hear a little bit what it sounds like when a choir sings. So number 8, please.
הלוך וקראת באוזני ירושלים לאמור כה אמר אדוני זכרתי לך חסד נעורייך אהבת כלולותייך לכתך אחריי במדבר בארץ לא זרוע ונאמר וזכרתי אני את בריתי אותך בימי נעורייך והקימותי לך ברית עולם ונאמר אהבן יכיר לי אפרים אם ילד שעשועים כי מדי דברי בו זכור אזכרנו עוד על כן עמו מעילות רחם הרחמנו נאום אדוני. אפשר לשיר על ידי עבדיך הנביאים של לבנדובסקי. הלוך וקראת ובהמשך זכרתי לך וכו'. אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו.
And then it continues.
זוכרנו בזיכרונך.
Okay. And now let's hear what's this. Let's hear number 9, please.
Beautiful.
Yeah, this was Makelat Kol Tzion Lagola, together with the Kol Israel Orchestra, conducted by Shabtai Petrushka. It was part of the Kol Israel collection from the National Library of music recorded and the broadcast records from the 50s. We have a lot of Lewandowski music was sung there by
Yes.
was sung in Israel by choirs and.
So we're coming to the end of our conversation of this very interesting talk about the music of the High Holidays and prayer and the understanding of the challenges and the strategies of what music is meant to do in the prayers. And I just wanted to conclude to ask you personally a final question. Maybe you could tell me from what's your personal favorite melody or favorite melodic moment in the High Holidays from your own experience? It's a difficult question.
It's a difficult question, but still, everybody has their favorites, and unfortunately, my favorites are gone. They're not sung anymore. But one of them is actually that's V'chol Ma'aminim, a tune that I heard from a Baal Tfilah that I heard for many years, named Moshe Nordheim, and he brought a tune that he learned from one of his teachers, his teacher, a chazan that did not get the honor he deserved for composing and teaching and preserving prayer melodies during the 20th century, a chazan named Zalman Polak. And in manuscripts of this Chazan Polak that are kept in the National Library, we found many of the tunes that he taught to his students, among them Moshe Nordheim, who very lawfully continued his teacher's traditions. And I'll just give you a taste of V'chol Ma'aminim that he brought from his teacher somewhere in a little village in today Hungary, then it was Yugoslavia. A tune that once you hear it, you will understand right away after this talk why people asked the Chazan not to sing anymore and replace the tune. But for me, it's part of my childhood and of the spirit of Yamim Noraim. It has 3 parts. V'chol ma'aminim שהוא אל אמונה הבוחן ובודק גנזי נסתרות וכל מאמינים שהוא בוחן כליות הגואל ממוות ופודה משחת וכל מאמינים שהוא גואל חזק הדן יחידי לבאי עולם. And then it goes back to the first part. וכל מאמינים שהוא דיין אמת. So on. Chaval al Devdin.
Beautiful. I'm glad that we could bring it back to some kind of a public sphere so people
Thank
know.
you for the opportunity.
And it's I'm not surprised that you like it because there's something very complex there. And as a musicologist, you know, the different shifts between
It's way beyond.
modes.
It's way beyond intellectual intellect.
It's
or
a personal experience growing up with
it's
something.
pure emotion.
Beautiful.
Pure emotion.
So thank you very much, Amalia,
Thank
for
you,
joining me
Naomi.
today, and I wish everyone Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
תודה רבה.
Thank you.